Dr. Kim Hannah sat in her chair at the Seoul Space Communication Center, watching numbers flash across her computer screen. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she could not look away from what she was seeing. Something impossible was happening across the galaxy. Director Kim, we have lost contact with the Altarian traders, said Lieutenant Park Ji-ho from his desk nearby. His voice shook slightly, which was strange because Ji-ho never got nervous about anything. Hannah rubbed her tired eyes and tried to make sense of the data. In just 6 hours, 17 different alien species had suddenly started broadcasting emergency messages to their own people. The computer translations were not perfect, but certain words kept appearing over and over: run away now, the cycle starts again, and most frightening of all, the harvest is coming. The door burst open and Dr. Lee Min-ho rushed in, holding his tablet with both hands like it might explode. Hannah, you need to see this right now. Our observation post near Centauri just detected massive fleet movements. The Zephyrians are leaving their home planet. All of them. The main wall screen flickered to life, showing data from humanity's farthest space stations. What they saw made no sense at all. Entire civilizations that numbered in the trillions were streaming away from their home worlds in perfectly organized groups. It was like watching every major city on Earth suddenly empty out at the same time. Seoul Control, this is Commander Cho Yuna at Lunar Base, came a voice over the emergency communication channel. The commander's weathered face appeared on a smaller screen. We are receiving a priority message from an alien ship called Silent Wind. They want permission to store their cultural archives with us. Put them through, Hannah ordered, her heart beating faster than it should. The alien's voice came through the translation system with an urgency that needed no translation. Even across the vast differences between species, fear sounded the same. Humans of Earth, you must listen very carefully to what I tell you. We have very little time before we too must join the great flight away from here. Every 50,000 of your years, it returns. We call it the harvester of worlds, the consumer of minds, the end of all things that think and dream and create. Your species has crossed the threshold of technology and knowledge. You shine too brightly now in the cosmic darkness. It will come for you as it came for us, as it came for all the others who came before. Static filled the channel for several long seconds before the voice returned, much weaker now. We have left information storage devices at coordinates we are sending to you now. Learn quickly what we have learned. Run faster than we can run. Even the stars themselves remember its terrible hunger. Then there was only silence. Hannah looked around the lab at her colleagues' pale faces. Humanity had spent decades building friendships with dozens of alien species, slowly learning their place in a galaxy full of ancient civilizations that had existed for millions of years. Now, in less than a day, they were alone again. Director, Ji-ho's voice was barely above a whisper. Long-range sensors are detecting energy signatures that match entire star systems going completely dark. Not destroyed by war or natural disasters. Just empty. Like someone turned off a light switch. Through the thick windows of the Seoul facility, Hannah could see the stars twinkling in Earth's night sky. They looked exactly the same as they had every night of her life. But now she knew a terrible truth that changed everything. Somewhere out there in the vast darkness between the stars, something ancient and hungry was waking up. Every other thinking species in the galaxy was running away as fast as they could. Her hands shook as she reached for her communication device. Get me the Global Defense Council immediately. Emergency priority. What should I tell them? Asked Ji-ho. Hannah stared at the data streaming across her screens. Reports of fleeing aliens came from every direction. Civilizations that had stood for millions of years were abandoning everything they had ever built. The greatest exodus in galactic history was happening right now, and humanity did not even know why. Tell them we are about to become very alone, she said quietly. And tell them something is coming that has scared every intelligent species in the galaxy into running away. As the hours passed, more reports came in. The proud hegemony fleets that had once controlled dozens of star systems were now fleeing toward the empty space between galaxies. The ancient Vorthan collective, whose technology was so advanced it seemed like magic, had abandoned their crystal cities and headed for the cosmic void. Even the mysterious energy beings from the galactic core were streaming away from their home regions. By morning, Earth's long-range sensors confirmed what Hannah had feared. Within 24 hours, every major alien civilization within 1,000 light-years had begun a coordinated retreat toward the empty spaces between galaxies. They were not just moving away from their homes. They were running away from something. The last transmission came from the hegemony diplomat who had first warned them. His message was simple and terrifying. Humans, we see your star burning bright in our senses. You have perhaps 20 or 30 of your years before it arrives in your region of space. We are sorry your species showed such promise. Run now, while you still can escape its attention. Do not try to fight it as others have tried. Do not be brave. Just run and hide in the darkness between the stars. It is the only way any of us survive. After that, there was only the silence of empty space where once there had been the voices of friends. 3 weeks had passed since every alien civilization in the galaxy had suddenly gone silent and fled their homes. Dr. Kim Hanna barely slept anymore, living on coffee and energy drinks in the cold research facility buried deep in the Antarctic ice. Her team worked day and night to understand the alien data storage devices that had been left behind like breadcrumbs for humanity to follow. I found something important, shouted Dr. Shin Daeho from across the freezing research bay. The language expert's breath made white clouds in the sub-zero air as he waved frantically at his holographic display. Hannah, you need to see this pattern right now. The three-dimensional timeline he had built from alien records showed something that made Hannah's blood run cold. Every 50,000 years, like clockwork, galactic civilization would suddenly shrink. All the advanced species would flee to the dark empty spaces between galaxies. The ones that stayed behind simply disappeared from history forever. Dr. Park Somin looked up from her physics station where she had been studying gravitational data. The space anomalies finally make sense now. We always wondered why certain areas of space showed signs of huge civilizations but were completely empty. They were not destroyed by wars or natural disasters. Something harvested them. Lieutenant Colonel Kang Hyakwo entered the facility, his military coat covered with Antarctic snow. The Joint Chief sent me for an update. Please tell me you found something we can use to fight this thing. Hannah pulled up the main display, showing a terrifying image put together from dozens of different alien records. The thing they called the Harvester was not a spaceship or even a group of spaceships. It was something that existed partially outside normal space and time, made from dark matter and strange energy that fed on consciousness itself. According to these records, Hannah explained while pointing at the display, the Harvester appears to be some kind of cosmic predator. It might be an ancient machine that went wrong millions of years ago. It targets species that have achieved certain technological advances. Faster than light travel, artificial intelligence, quantum consciousness manipulation. All things we have accomplished in the last century, Hyakwo noted with a grim expression. Dr. Yoon Jiwon, their alien biology expert, had been quietly studying physiological data from the records. There is something else important. The species that survive these cycles are not necessarily the strongest or most advanced. They are the ones that run the farthest and hide in the deepest darkness. The Harvester seems to lose interest in prey that flees beyond a certain distance from the center of the galaxy. So the survival plan has always been to run away, Somin said. Every species learns this pattern and builds their civilization knowing that one day they will have to abandon everything and flee to the cosmic darkness. Hannah stared at the assembled data, understanding something terrible. We are not just facing a predator. We are looking at a galactic ecosystem based entirely on fear. Entire civilizations rise and fall knowing they will eventually have to run away. Art, culture, scientific achievement, all of it built knowing it will be temporary. The facility's communication array suddenly crackled to life. A weak signal from the edge of the solar system carried a familiar voice. It was the hegemony diplomat they had spoken to weeks ago. Humans, can you still hear this transmission? We monitor from the darkness between stars. The signs are clear now. The Harvester approaches your sector of the galaxy. Maybe 20 of your years, maybe 30. We are sorry. Your species showed such great promise. You must run now, while you can still escape its attention. Do not make the same mistake others made of trying to fight. Do not be brave. Just run and hide. After the transmission ended, the Antarctic facility fell silent except for the howling wind outside. Colonel Hyakwo was the first to speak. How long would it take to evacuate 7 billion people to interstellar space? Impossible with our current technology, Somin replied immediately. We would need at least 1,000 years, and that assumes we could build generation ships for everyone. Hannah looked at the data one more time. She saw the endless cycles of fear and flight, the countless civilizations that had chosen survival over standing and fighting. But a different kind of understanding began to form in her mind. Not just about the Harvester's nature, but about humanity's nature. The records showed that every species followed the same pattern when they learned about the Harvester. First came disbelief, then panic, then the desperate rush to build evacuation fleets. Every single species made the same choice when faced with this threat. They ran. But as Hannah studied the data, she noticed something the alien civilizations might have missed. The Harvester had never faced serious resistance. It had consumed countless worlds over millions of years, but always against prey that was trying to flee. Never against prey that was trying to fight back. "Colonel," she said slowly, "I need you to set up a meeting with the Global Defense Council. I think we need to discuss something they will not want to hear." "What kind of something?" Hannah looked at the image of the Harvester on her screen. It was terrifying beyond imagination, a cosmic horror that had fed on civilizations for longer than humans had existed. But it had one weakness that no other species had ever thought to exploit. "I think we need to discuss the possibility that running away might not be the only option." The emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council took place in the deep underground bunkers beneath Geneva. Representatives from every major nation on Earth sat around a holographic display that showed humanity's terrible choices. President Kim Tae-jun of the Korean Federation looked tired as Dr. Kim Hannah finished explaining what they had learned. "So our only options are to run away or die," said Director General Morrison of the European Union. "And running away means leaving Earth forever, abandoning everything we have built, and spending generations hiding in the empty space between stars." "That is the pattern every other species has followed for millions of years," Hannah confirmed. "And it has worked. The survivors always return after each cycle and rebuild their civilizations." Fleet Admiral Park Sung-go leaned forward, his weathered hands pressed together. "Doctor, in all your research about these cycles, did you find any record of a species that chose to fight back?" "A few tried in the early stages of each cycle," Hannah replied. "The records suggest they were all consumed within days. No species has ever successfully fought against the Harvester." The room became very quiet until a new voice spoke from the corner. General Choi Myung, head of Earth's military forces, stood up slowly. "With all respect to the learned species that came before us, they were not human." President Kim raised an eyebrow. "General, are you saying we are somehow better than civilizations that have existed for millions of years?" "No, sir. I am saying we are different." Myung turned on her own display, showing technical drawings and battle plans. Every other species followed the same pattern. They developed technology, expanded across space, then fled when the threat came, then returned and repeated the cycle. They built their entire civilizations knowing they would eventually have to run away. Dr. Lee Min-ho from the research team interrupted, "General, the power readings from the Harvester are beyond anything we can understand. Some of these things are as big as moons. And we have never met a problem we could not solve by hitting it with something bigger," Myung replied with a grim smile. "We have abandoned alien technology scattered throughout this part of space. We have the industrial power of 7 billion humans who refuse to run away. We have 20 years to prepare. No previous species has had these advantages." Admiral Park nodded slowly. "The asteroid mining operations could be converted to weapons platforms. Jupiter's moons are already partially hollowed out from our mining projects. And the experimental weapons we have been developing. You are talking about turning our entire solar system into a fortress," President Kim said. "Yes, sir. We make our star system the place where we draw the line." Dr. Kang Ji-hoon, the head of physics research, had been running numbers on his tablet. "The energy requirements would be enormous. We would need to convert every factory in the system to weapons production. We would have to take apart entire cities for raw materials." "Then that is what we do," President Kim said quietly. The room turned to look at him. "I have been listening to this debate, and I keep thinking the same thing. If we run away, we survive. But we stop being human. We become just another species that gave up their home when things got difficult." He stood up and walked to the central display showing Earth from space. "My grandfather fought in a war where he held a bridge against impossible odds because someone had to stand firm. Today, we hold a star system." The vote was much closer than the history books would later record, but the decision was made. Humanity would not run away. They would change their entire civilization for war. Within months, the greatest military preparation in human history began. The space shipyards around Earth grew larger than anyone had thought possible. Mars became a giant weapons factory. The asteroid belt was transformed into a defensive network that stretched across millions of kilometers. Dr. Shin Dae-ho worked with engineering teams to reverse engineer and improve every piece of alien technology they could find. "We are not just building weapons," he explained to his exhausted team. "We are building hope. For the first time in galactic history, someone is preparing to fight back." The few alien observers still watching from deep space sent increasingly worried warnings. The hegemony diplomat's final message was simple: Humans, what you are trying has never been attempted before. What you risk is everything you are. What you might achieve, we cannot imagine. As the years passed and the preparations grew more intense, humanity changed. They did not become the scattered refugees that filled the galaxy's dark corners. They became something new. A species that had looked at certain death and decided to build something bigger than their fear. Children grew up knowing they might die fighting an ancient cosmic horror, but also knowing they were part of something that had never been tried before. Scientists worked on weapons that previous civilizations had been too afraid to even imagine. Engineers built fortifications on a scale that dwarfed anything in galactic history. The mining stations in the asteroid belt became weapons platforms that could crack moons. The cities on Mars were redesigned as military production centers. Even Earth itself was surrounded by defensive systems that turned the planet into the heart of a fortress that spanned the entire solar system. When alien refugees in the deep void detected what humanity was building, their messages carried a mixture of terror and something that had been missing from the galaxy for 50,000 years. They carried hope. 15 years after humanity began preparing for war, the space sensors at the edge of the solar system detected something wrong near Neptune's orbit. It was not a spaceship appearing from hyperspace or a fleet dropping out of warp drive. Instead, reality itself began to bend and twist around a single point, as if the universe was being slowly torn open like paper. Admiral Park Sungo, now with gray hair but still sharp-minded, watched from the command center built inside Ceres Station as impossible readings streamed across his screens. Contact confirmed. The Harvester has arrived in our solar system. Dr. Kim Hanna, her hair now white from years of stress and sleepless nights, stood beside the tactical displays that had become her entire world. Energy readings are completely off our measurement scales. It is not just huge, it exists in multiple dimensions at the same time. The thing that emerged from the space distortion was beyond human understanding. Larger than Earth itself, it appeared to be made from dark matter and exotic particles that shifted between being visible and completely invisible to their senses. Ancient structures that might have been weapons or feeding devices extended from its bulk like the arms of a cosmic jellyfish. All stations, this is Admiral Park. Begin Operation Standing Ground. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From the asteroid belt came the light of 1,000 artificial suns as the converted mining stations opened fire with weaponized fusion reactors. The orbital platforms around Mars launched waves of projectiles moving at nearly the speed of light, while Jupiter's moon bases fired experimental quantum weapons that tore holes in space itself. The Harvester reacted with what seemed like surprise. Its approach toward Earth slowed, and for the first time in recorded galactic history, one of these ancient entities took defensive action. Barriers made of twisted space-time absorbed much of humanity's first attack, but not all of it. "We are actually hurting it," whispered Lieutenant Commander Oh Jin-Sol from her position at the sensor control station. The Harvester's counterattack came as waves of probability distortion that aged entire sections of space, turning some human installations to dust in seconds while leaving others completely untouched. But humanity's spread-out defense network had been designed exactly for this kind of attack. Captain Yo Min-jin commanded the Sacrifice Wave. These were converted civilian ships filled with volunteers who flew directly at the entity's core structures. "For everyone who comes after us," she transmitted as her ship's antimatter core exploded against what appeared to be a feeding tentacle. The battle continued for days without stopping. Entire moons were converted to pure energy and hurled at the Harvester. The experimental weapons that Earth's desperate scientists had developed over 15 years all found their targets. Devices that turned quantum uncertainty into weapons, gravity bombs that created tiny black holes, and reality anchors that forced the entity to remain in normal space. Dr. Lee Min-ho, coordinating the scientific response from deep beneath the moon's surface, watched readings that should have been impossible. "It is adapting to our attacks, but much slower than it should be able to. I think it has never had to adapt before." The Harvester's feeding mechanism was designed to drain consciousness from helpless prey. But it had never encountered a species that continued shooting back while being consumed. Human ships, even while being dissolved by exotic energies, kept firing until their last systems failed. Wave after wave of human defenders threw themselves at the ancient horror. The asteroid belt defense grid fired until the weapons melted from overuse. The Mars orbital platforms launched everything they had built over 15 years. Even civilian ships carrying families evacuating from the outer colonies turned around to join the fight when they saw the battle. On the 7th day of continuous combat, something happened that had never occurred in millions of years of galactic history. The Harvester began to pull back. "Confirm that sensor reading," Admiral Park ordered, hardly able to believe what he was seeing. "Confirmed, Sir. It is retreating toward the outer system. Energy signatures are becoming unstable. I think we have actually wounded it. From the observation deck of Earth's last remaining orbital station, President Kim Tae-jun, now ancient but still refusing to give up, watched as the impossible entity that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years limped away from humanity's solar system. Around him, the remnants of the human fleet regrouped among the debris of their civilization. They had lost nearly half of their space-based infrastructure. Entire worlds had been stripped of their atmospheres. The human cost was beyond calculation. Billions had died in the fighting. But for the first time in galactic history, a harvester had been turned away by force. Get me a communication line to the deep space monitoring stations, the president ordered. I want to know where it is going. The answer would come within hours, and it would change the entire galaxy forever. The deep space sensors that humanity had placed throughout the local stellar region detected the harvester's movement as it fled the solar system. But something was wrong with its energy patterns. The ancient entity was no longer the perfect cosmic predator that had consumed countless civilizations. It was dying. For the first time in 50 million years, a harvester had encountered prey that fought back hard enough to inflict mortal damage. The wounds that humanity's desperate weapons had torn in its exotic matter structure were spreading like cracks in glass. Within days, the entity that had been the galaxy's ultimate predator became a slowly expanding cloud of dark matter, dissolving back into the quantum foam from which it had originally been constructed. The impossible had happened. Humanity had not just survived the harvester. They had killed it. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the deep space monitoring stations that humanity had scattered throughout the local arm of the galaxy detected something that made every scientist check their instruments 3 times. The harvester entity that had retreated from human space was floating dead in the void between star systems, its exotic matter structure slowly dissolving back into empty space. Dr. Kim Hanna, now promoted to Director of Galactic Affairs, stood before the emergency assembly of Earth's surviving leadership. Despite her advanced age, her voice carried the weight of someone who had witnessed history change forever. Confirmed across all sensor networks, she announced to the room. The harvester is dead. Not sleeping, not retreating to some higher dimension. Dead. Our weapons did not just damage it, they appear to have disrupted whatever process kept it stable across multiple dimensions. The reaction from the scattered alien civilizations hiding in the galactic darkness came in waves. First came disbelief, then desperate attempts to verify the sensor readings, and finally something the galaxy had not experienced in millions of years. Hope. Admiral Park Sungo, now bearing radiation scars from the battle, coordinated humanity's response to the flood of communications from species emerging from their hiding places. We are receiving contact attempts from over 200 different civilizations. Some of them claim to have been fleeing for multiple cycles. The first to return were the hegemony ships that had been monitoring from the edge of the system. Their diplomat, the same individual who had warned humanity to flee, requested permission to approach Earth with a delegation. President Kim Tae-jun, despite protests from his security team about his age and health, insisted on meeting with the returning aliens personally. The meeting took place aboard the rebuilt lunar station, with Earth rising blue and scarred but still beautiful in the background. We come to witness an impossible thing, the hegemony representative transmitted through their translation device. A species that does not run away. A species that makes predator into prey. We must understand how this changes everything. Dr. Shin Daeho had spent months analyzing what this meant for the galaxy. The galactic ecosystem was based on a cycle of fear. Civilizations developed technology, reached a dangerous threshold, then spent their energy on running away rather than advancement. The harvester was not just a predator. It was a limiting factor that kept galactic civilization from true progress. And now that limitation is gone, President Kim observed. The changes came slowly at first, then faster and faster. Species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of running and hiding began to develop in completely new directions. Ancient civilizations that had been stuck in repeating patterns of retreat and return started to explore technologies they had never dared to research. But it was the younger species, those who had learned of the harvester's existence but never experienced its terror personally, who adapted most quickly to the new reality. They looked to humanity not as saviors, but as proof that the impossible was just very difficult. Dr. Park Sumin, now leading the joint alien-human research programs, marveled at the cooperative projects emerging across the galaxy. We are seeing scientific advancement at rates that were impossible under the old system. When species do not have to keep half their resources ready for flight, when they do not have to limit their development to avoid attracting attention, the entire galaxy becomes a laboratory. Some of the older civilizations struggled with the new reality. The Vorthan Collective, who had perfected the art of exodus across 17 cycles, found it difficult to adapt to permanent settlement. Several species experienced what human psychologists called survivor's guilt over their abandonment of countless homeworlds throughout history. But new alliances formed quickly. The Zephyrians returned to their ancestral system and invited human engineers to help rebuild their worlds with defensive capabilities. The trade routes that had been abandoned began to carry not just goods, but ideas about how to face the unknown rather than flee from it. 10 years after the Harvester's death, Ambassador Lee Sunny stood before the First Galactic Council to meet in over 50,000 years. Representatives from across the local arm of the galaxy had gathered on a neutral station built cooperatively in the space between old territorial boundaries. "We gather not as survivors," she began, "but as inheritors of a galaxy where fear no longer defines the limits of what is possible. The cycle is broken. What we build next is limited only by our courage to reach beyond what we thought was safe." In the decades that followed, historians would debate whether humanity's stand at Sol was an act of desperate madness or calculated genius. But the alien children who grew up never knowing the fear of the harvest cycle, who built their dreams without the assumption of eventual flight, knew the truth. The universe had turned away, as it always did when faced with impossible odds. But Earth had stood firm, and in standing firm, had taught the galaxy that some things were worth risking everything to protect. Species that had spent millions of years building civilizations designed to be abandoned suddenly found themselves free to create things meant to last forever. Art, architecture, and technology bloomed in ways that had been impossible when every achievement came with the knowledge that it would eventually have to be left behind. The new cycle had begun, and it was built not on the rhythm of fear and flight, but on the stubborn human insistence that home was a place you defended, not a place you abandoned when things became dangerous. For the first time in galactic history, the future was not predetermined by ancient fear, but limited only by the combined imagination of species who had learned that sometimes, the only way forward was to refuse to step back.